Welcome, friends and Her Bible listeners. I'm Jenny Steinbach and the producer of Her Bible, and I have the privilege of introducing you to Bonnie Gray, and she is the author of Sweet Like Jasmine, and she's going to just share with us her heart and her heart for women. So thank you for joining me today, Bonnie.
Thank you for having me, Jenny. It's so good to be here.
Thank you. I would love to hear, first off, a little bit about how you came to Christ.
The moment that I first heard the gospel, I was in the mountains. I was in the mountains. I was 8 years old, and our church had a church wide retreat. And I went to a church kind of old school where the kids were sitting in the main service with everybody. There wasn't a separate children's ministry where we sat on the side with our own teachers. We had to sit in the back and we listened to the whole message, the whole sermon. And I was just kind of waiting for it to be over because of the refreshments that I knew were waiting for us. But there was something interesting about this message. This message, we had a guest speaker, and he was just such a compelling speaker because he was telling it as a story. And I love books since I was a little girl. Books have really been my refuge. I didn't grow up in a happy home. I grew up in a broken home where I was the oldest in a single parent family. And it was a very toxic environment for me growing up. But I love stories. It was a place where I always felt happy is behind the pages of a book. And so this speaker was telling a story about how a prince had to leave his palace and went among the people because every time the people knew that he was royalty, everybody would treat him very different. And so already once he started this story, it kind of almost sounded like a fairy tale. Immediately my ears were perked. But the story suddenly took a strange turn because this prince was accused of a crime that he didn't commit. And so I thought, okay, for sure, now he's going to reveal who he really is. And he didn't. And then it took a really odd turn because all his friends left him. He had nobody next to him. And it was in that moment that I really felt connected to the story because I have always felt loneliness. I was always feeling different from all my friends. And even though I went to church, I felt different from other people at church because I didn't have a dad. So in that moment, it was interesting that it was the loneliness, that feeling. I felt God touch my heart. I felt really moved. Even now, as I tell the story, I'm always emotional. And I always say it should be that way. It should be that way when we think back on that moment when you first feel God touch our hearts. And so it was in that moment that I learned, the speaker revealed that this isn't just a story, but in fact, this was Jesus. And he came because he loved us. And so it was interesting. It was his loneliness that allowed me to feel God's love. And I love telling this story because I think it's a continual connection point that when we are feeling low in the moments in life when we feel alone, whether it's from worry or stress or anxiety, it's beautiful how we can find God in those moments. And that's when God becomes real to us. We may know his truth, but we experience his truth when we can open our hearts to him and know him in a new way and allow him to know us. So that's how I first became a believer, is just hearing Jesus's story and feeling that he understands my story.
Wow, that's amazing. I love that. And I identify on so many levels because I became a Christian. Well, I was 18 when I became a Christian, but I had a broken home and a lot of difficulty at home. And my parents eventually reconciled. And I'm the oldest, but there was a lot of hardship because of that. So thank you for sharing that. I wanted to ask then, how does that affect your walk with God today?
Yeah, I think that I would say that there are two phases in my faith. The reason why I say 2 is because I have a before and after moment. You know how even right now at the time of this recording, we're walking through Lent, and we always say on Friday, we remember that it's not we don't just stay in our Saturdays, we know there's a Sunday, right? There's a Friday, Good Friday night, and then there's the resurrection. Well, I have one of those moments in my life that is like my Gethsemane moment. So before I had panic attacks, anxiety, and depression, I was hit with that as a new mom of 2 boys. But before that, growing up, being a young woman, going to college, as a 20 something professional, even as a 30 something single, I was single, I got married later in my 30s. My season of faith was always very focused on the mountaintop experience, meaning my faith was, I would say, God used my faith to help me overcome a lot and be the encourager. God allowed me to serve others. I loved training others to study the Bible. I trained other people to train others to study the Bible. And it was kind of an overcoming kind of faith. But it was after my Gethsemane moment, unexpectedly, I didn't understand why at the moment. Then it became a different season of faith, which was more about receiving God's care, healing my emotions, healing the hurt and the wounds that I've put away to the side. So I didn't know that God wanted those broken parts of my heart. I felt the earlier part of my season of my faith, God wanted my strength, but I didn't know that He wanted the broken pieces.
Wow,
So,
that's so rich. Go ahead, sorry.
no, 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 yeah, yeah. So that's, yeah, from there, I mean, it's a great conversation, like you said, that God, my faith right now, God is showing me more about what it means to connect with Him through my brokenness and not just what I feel are the best parts of myself.
Mm. Could you share an example of that?
Well, right now, I'm preparing for my newest book. It's called Breathe 21 Days to Stress Less and Transform Chaos to Calm. And so that is really my journey. And the reason why I wanted to talk about my book is because I was telling my books were my best friends. God spoke to me through books, through godly women and men, and it was very safe for me to read between the pages of the book. And so that's how I process my emotions is I journal and I write. And so it's interesting that God has allowed me to share this journey of how do I draw closer to God in times where I stress and I worry and I feel most anxious. Because in the past, I would always hide my emotions. So, practically, an example of that would be whenever I was worried, I would tell myself, my own self talk, stop worrying. Why are you complaining? Just get it done. So, that's an example where I felt God didn't want me to worry because I thought worry was a sin. It prevents me from serving God and serving others. I felt it was selfish to worry about myself. But now I've learned that it's not true. When Jesus said, don't worry about tomorrow, look at the birds, look at the flowers. Jesus was encouraging us not to worry. He was telling us that we can respond to our worries by taking action. We can look at the birds. We can look at the flowers. We can be reminded of God's care. So I've learned to take action. So, for instance, if I'm worried, I'm going to do something that helps nurture myself. So, in the past, I would try to think myself out of stress by shaming myself and ignoring my heart. Now, I don't talk to myself that way. I'll say, no, Jesus, this is how I'm feeling. I'm really worried about my son. I don't know what to do. Then I will take action. Okay, what is something that will bring me peace in this moment? Okay, even though I'm worried about him, I am going to call a friend and we're going out for sushi tonight because I really need someone to confide in and talk to. So many times I would wait until the worry passes or I've solved it, then I'll tell a friend, this is what was happening, but this is how I addressed it, and now everything's okay. I would wait. So that's a one specific example. I don't wait now. I don't wait
Mm,
until my anxiety is over. I take action in my anxiety to do something to release my stress and to confide in God or confide in a friend.
I love that. It definitely sounds like something that would be so helpful to acknowledge those feelings and not let them grow, um, and into something. I know you've talked about soul care in your writings, and so that seems like a great example of soul care. Is there anything else you wanted to share about soul care?
Yeah, I think that soul care, many people, the first question people usually ask me is it selfish and is it unspiritual? It just seems so worldly or it's so me focused. So that is usually the first reaction I have. And I just want to bust that myth right off the bat because Jesus is the originator of soul care. Matthew 11:28, Jesus says, come to me, those who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. Now it's interesting, Jesus doesn't say, come to me strong, come to me cheerful. It's the opposite. He is giving us an invitation to come to him. And now, not only do we come to him, he says in the following verse in 29, he says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, and you will find rest for your soul. So, this active words is taking different type of work, not the way the world works, which is you have to earn your rest, you have to deserve your peace, and you need to do something first. But God says, my yoke is comfortable and light. So that's really interesting. It's kind of odd for me because I was the oldest. I am the responsible one. And many of us are like that. Those of us who serve and love God, we
Mhm.
forget that God says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. So we love God with our mind. We know his word. We need to study it. It's important. We love God with our heart, which is our devotion, where we serve from. But we forget that God also says to love him with our soul. How we feel matters to God.
Mhm.
Our desires matter to God. And those were very odd words for me, comfortable and light. Like, no, I think harder is better, right? God, the more something's harder, then the more I'm loving you and serving you. And yet Jesus is gentle. He's humble and he says, no, do what is comfortable for you because together this is what it would feel like together. So soul care is not selfish. Soul care is not unspiritual. In fact, Jesus is the one that invites us into this. And I like to talk about soul care. It's the practice of letting God nourish and tend to our bodies and our emotions, tending to the garden of your soul, like soil nourishing seeds of flowers. So our heart, and we see this metaphor in scripture that, the seeds that God plants in our heart, we want to nurture that soil. So it's soft and it has been watered. So God doesn't want us to be exhausted. He wants us to be nurtured.
I see what you're saying so much too, because it's easy for us to, if we've been wounded in the past, have kind of a hard shell so we don't receive what Jesus is offering.
Yeah, I think it's easier for me to be strong. It's easier for me to not feel my emotions and just keep doing. I'd rather, I often would struggle with that. I say, God, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. That's just so much easier for me. Let's just dispense with all this other stuff. But yet Jesus says, no, I'm not going to pass by you. Just like the Good Samaritan, he says, I'm not going to pass by your wounds. I'm not going to leave you on the side and ignore the places that you're hurting. I'm going to take you in my arms. I'm going to put oil on your wounds. We're going to look at it together and we're going to do things that are healing for your wounds. I'm going to put you up. I'm going to put you in a spacious place in a hotel, meaning like somewhere that's where you can rest. We need rest. We should not feel guilty. In fact, that's how we can be Christ to one another. So that we can serve others, we need to be filled. We need to heal. We need to rest. So we need to have those safe people in our lives where we can confide, hey, this is really hard. Because there are places where we're serving our kids, we can't tell them those things. We're serving people in our ministries and our work. That's not the right places, right? But we need these other places of rest. We need those kind of soul care relationships. And everyone needs to have space in their calendar, in their day, in their week. There needs to be space to experience rest. So it's not a bonus, it's not an extra, it's not a luxury. In fact, it's first place. First Corinthians says we comfort others with the comfort we first receive ourselves. So we just can't keep pouring out. And Jesus himself, we see this himself, right? Jesus, during the night that it was his worth Gethsemane moment, he chose to invite three people to come with him. And Jesus often was his practice to pray alone, but yet he needed someone that evening to be with him. I mean, even Jesus needed friends, right? He needed comfort.
Yeah.
He needed the solace. So how much more do we need each other?
Mhm. What would you say to someone who doesn't feel like they have those kind of safe friends? Where do they start?
You know, it's interesting because I knew many people in my community of faith. I was a leader in my 30s for a singles ministry in my church. I had so many people that I know in my mind cared for me, but when I was experiencing anxiety and panic attacks and depression, I actually was crying because I said, I feel so alone. I didn't even know who I would talk to. And I realized most of the time that I did meet with people, it was through work, quote unquote, work ministry. We'd have coffee, but we talk about, oh, what are we going to do for a Bible study? Or what are we going to do for our plans for next month? And so I actually had to start from the very beginning, learning about soul care. Okay, I need some new type of soul care friends. I had to be vulnerable and reach out to someone, and I did have a litmus test because it was hard. Those of us who did grow up, and it doesn't even have to be our childhood. Maybe you survived a really tough time, but you got through it alone. So we don't have that experience. It's normal to feel like protective of yourself. So it's not something, I wouldn't say negative. It's just an area that we can grow in with Jesus. But I had to start from the beginning. I said, how can I find somebody that might be safe? One of my first litmus tests is I would ask them questions about some area of like may struggle or wrestle with. And so for me, everyone's going to have a different litmus test. Mine is, does this person tell me their story? Or are they only going to tell me what they know, only the knowledge of where they want me to be? Or are they going to tell me their story, what happened to them, how they got through it? That was what gave me the confidence to say, okay, well, actually, I wanted to share something with you. I'm really scared about it. I don't know what you're going to think about it once I tell you, but this is what's been happening.
Mm.
So that was my litmus test.
Yeah, so like knowledge versus vulnerability.
Yes. Yes.
Mhm. Yeah, that sounds great. So, we've come out of COVID and people seem to be struggling. And a friend just shared a statistic about young people struggling with anxiety. And so, how can we encourage people, or what do people need?
This is very interesting, talking about knowledge versus vulnerability. In Romans 12:2, it says that we're not to be conformed to the patterns of the world, but be transformed by our mind. It's interesting that the mind that God created in us, we have a left brain and a right brain. So the left brain is our logic. That's where the knowledge part comes in. That's where we solve problems. That's where we get things done. But there is the right brain. The right brain is our emotional self. That's where the emotions reside in the brain. That is where our five senses are activated: our sense of touch, our sense of smell, taste, and our visual, the things we see and the things we smell, our scent, the scents and the fragrances that we smell. This is the world in which this is the part of our brain where we can experience the truth. So this is between knowing the truth and experiencing the truth. So you talk about young people. I have two teenage boys, 13 and 17, and I've learned that the more I learn how to nurture myself and help my body and emotions calm down, I naturally will share it with my children. So these things I'm sharing with you, it applies to even my children. So when my son is stressed, just like I say to myself, I said, I need to help him to do something to experience rest, not just talk about it. So in the past, Jenny, I would say to myself, and then I would say to my son, stop worrying about it. And I would give him all the reasons why he needs to stop worrying. Well, guess what? Studies show that when we lean on our thinking when we're stressed, that increases anxiety. I'm going to say that again. When we are stressed or worried, studies show when we use our left brain to try to think our way through, it increases anxiety. And so what happens is our body goes and kicks into high alert mode and we overthink. Now, this isn't because we don't have the willpower to stop it. Our bodies, the way God created, literally goes into the fight, flight, stress mode, and it's trying to help us. It says, oh my gosh, there's something terrible going on. I'm going to help by just hyper focusing on whatever problem it is so that, Bonnie or Jenny can solve it. And now, how do you calm? God created a counterbalancing force. Our bodies, it's called a rest and relaxation response. Now, how do we activate it? Okay, yes, we pray, but we need to also put feet to faith. We have to take action to activate that response. And so when we activate by using one of those five senses, okay, so now I'll say to Josh when he comes home from school, because this is what I do to myself now. Remember, I learned through comforting myself. I said, you know what? Instead, Jenny, of saying, why are you so grouchy? Why are you worrying? I'll say now, oh boy, you must have had quite a day. What? Tell me about it. What happened? And he might even say nothing. And I understand it now because I usually say nothing, right? No, nothing's bothering me. But what I'll do is I'll just sit down. I'll even, even though he's a teenager, I'll give him a hug. I will say, hey, we've got some cookies here, you want some cookies or, something, let's have something to eat. Just like drop your backpack down, just take a breath. We need to take action. So how is that we can be there for somebody? We need to spend time with them. We need to do something that helps them feel our touch. We need to do what I call side by side activities, meaning go out for lunch or go take them out for breakfast or go for a walk. I'll say that to my son as well. I'll say, you know what? I know you don't feel like it, but let's just put on our shoes, just go for a walk, put on your jacket, and tell him, let's go for a walk. Now, it works with my son because we've been doing that since he was little. Okay. That now, if you haven't had that practice, you might just say, hey, on the weekend, let's go hiking. Or, you know what? You've always wanted to try that breakfast place. Let's go this weekend. There needs to be an experience in order for the person to experience the truth. When you're stressed, the talking that's not what changes the person's mood. Obviously, it's important to tell ourselves the truth. Okay. Remember, back to God's greatest commandment, love the Lord your God with our heart, mind, and soul. So we do want to speak the truth, but what's going to help somebody relax or de-stress? It's always going to be an experience. It's always going to be something you do together with them or something that helps engage one of their five senses. So another
That's
thing is
so good.
helping.
Mhm.
Yeah. Sorry, I keep going, but yeah, what do you
Yeah,
think,
yeah.
Jenny?
Yeah, I think that's awesome and super helpful for moms. And I have four sons. They're young adults now. I wish we had had this conversation earlier.
Yeah, it's never too
So
late for sure.
yeah, and of course now they're spread all over the country except one is home. It's just a great reminder of taking, I love that side by side, activity that's going to engage their senses and encourage them. One of the things that I noticed in your writing is discussing about deeper intimacy with God and helping women grow in that. And would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, I think that speaks to, I think, four different areas of wellness. Spiritual intimacy is about being vulnerable about our needs. So I would ask our listener, even now as we're taking a moment to pause and to think about the whole area of wellness and intimacy, which area do you feel you're missing the most in terms of wellness? Would it be emotional wellness, physical wellness, spiritual wellness, or social wellness? Because even just acknowledging our need, that is the first moment of intimacy. And also, what is it we desire? This is a repeated question Jesus always asks us. We see in scripture. He always asks somebody, "What do you want? What is it that you need? What is it that you desire?" So I think that's the first moment of intimacy. But the second, which I have been talking about in our time together, is we have to take action. We need to, that's very vulnerable. And you'll see anytime in scripture we were to, kind of do exploration, somebody somewhere had to take an action to draw closer to Jesus, to receive something from him. So there is some kind of movement, some kind of action God is prompting you to take. And actually, the more scary it feels, the more resistant we are. If it benefits us, meaning gives us peace, gives us joy, that is actually, I often say, a good indicator. That's where your next moment of intimacy is with God. What is it that would give you more peace? What's something that you need to let go of or stop doing? Is it a role that you've been playing, which was necessary for a season in life, but maybe it's time to let that role or responsibility go? Is there something new that you want to do or begin, or something you have let go of, and yet God is continuing to bring it to your path and say, I really want you to return to this, something that gives you peace or joy? And if you're feeling a little anxious about it, it's probably a good indicator it's a place of vulnerability and intimacy with God, because that's where you're going to be in that position of receiving. That's
Mhm,
where you're no longer giving something to God, but you want to receive something from him. So that's going to
mhm,
be a place of intimacy.
mm. I love that because we think we're so independent and self-sufficient, but everything we have, we receive from God. And so we really are in that position of receiver, but we need to acknowledge and experience it and rest in it.
Yes.
So this has been so great, Bonnie. I love what you're sharing, and I think it's going to be so encouraging to everybody who listens to it. And I just want to thank you so much for the journey you've walked and how you've trusted God in painful circumstances that have brought you to this place today to be able to share such wonderful truths and helpful practices and vulnerability with us.
Well, thank you for inviting me to be vulnerable in this space.
Yes. Well, thank you, and great to be with you.
God bless.